test.
I can always turn it down, but I can't turn it up very much. So, yeah. Oh, great. All right. We're gonna get I've got my back turned a little. All right. Let's get ready. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us for our last program for the exhibition Delilah Montoya, Activating Chicana Resistance. The exhibition actually closes on May the 2nd. We do have a Spanish translation, live Spanish translation for this program. So you can pick up a headset over here just outside the doors.
Buenas tardes a todos y gracias por venir a este programa, último programa de exhibición de Delilah Montoya, que viene siendo la resistencia de activación chicana. Tenemos interpretación al español y si alguien gusta la interpretación para escuchar toda la conversación al español, usamos audífonos y pueden recoger uno aquí a la entrada de la puerta. Estaremos ahí pasándolos. Gracias.
We are really grateful to Roadrunner Services, Translation Services, for offering that opportunity today. So the exhibition, the programming, and the catalog for this exhibition were all supported by the Terra Foundation. And I want to let you all know that catalogs are still available in the museum store if you want to purchase one of those. So let me get started with introducing the participants in today's conversation. Our panelists are Delilah Montoya, she, her. Delilah is a contemporary Chicana photographer, printer, and installation artist based in Albuquerque. A graduate of the University of New Mexico, her work is rooted in the mestiza experience of the Southwest and influenced by Aztec, Spanish, and cross-border traditions. In 2021, she became the first recipient of the Mellon Foundation's Latinx Artist Fellowship. Her work has been exhibited, yes, absolutely. Her work has been exhibited internationally and is held in major collections, including the Smithsonian, American Art Museum, LACMA, the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, and the Albuquerque Museum. Deyadira Arellano, she, her. Deyadira is, yes, is a member of Sin Huellas Artist Collective and an experienced organizer serving urban and rural communities. Her work as a community organizer intersects environmental justice, immigration, public education, labor, and gender justice. Her current role at tejasbarrios.org helps create balance and fosters an intergenerational environmental justice organization that honors our roots and supports a future with many voices. Teague Gonzalez, she, ella, they. Teague is a movement lawyer and leader with 20-plus years of experience in direct legal services, community-led legislative advocacy, administrative advocacy, and impact litigation. Raised on the Texas-New Mexico-Chihuahua border, they have worked with communities in San Francisco, Oakland, and Miami, advocating for people experiencing homelessness, incarceration, deep poverty, and immigrant families. Now the co-executive director at the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, Teague leads a statewide organization of 80 staff across Albuquerque, Las Cruces, and Santa Fe. They are licensed in New Mexico, California, and Colorado, and ground their work in community-led organizing and traditions of resistance. And today's moderator is Soo-Han Ho, she, they. Soo-Han is a professor of art and ecology at the University of New Mexico, an artist working across performance, sound, and installation. She explores the relationships between bodies and sites of memories through collaborative practices. Projects include migrant songs and shelter in place, and her work has been presented internationally. Soo-Han has received support from the MAP Fund, Art for Justice Fund, and Art Matters Grant. She lives and works in the Tiwa Territory, also known as Albuquerque, and is a founding member of Fronteristas, a collective working to end migrant detention and abolish the prison industrial complex. So I'm going to turn it over to Soo-Han to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, everyone. And thank you to the Albuquerque Museum for hosting this beautiful exhibition. Hopefully you'll get to see it a few more times this week before it closes. And thank you to Elizabeth and Diana Delgado for making this panel happen. So I just want to give some brief remarks, kind of setting the context for our conversation today on art, activism, and immigration. I'm going to give a very brief history of US immigration detention and hopefully keep my remarks short for our panel. And I'm trying to remember to speak slowly for our interpreters now. Before I begin, just want to acknowledge that here in New Mexico, we are on Apache, Pueblo, and Dene lands. And with the brief history that I'm going to give, I want to also acknowledge the deeper historical context of immigration in this country, which is framed by the fact that we are on stolen land, as well as the fact that the border has crossed communities multiple times. So I have to tie the history of immigration detention to a broader history of the prison industrial complex in the US. We live in the world's leading incarcerator with over 2 million people in prisons and jails across the country. Next slide. And 1 out of 5 prisoners worldwide is in the US, is incarcerated in the US. Next slide. So we'll go to the next slide, just to give you a very brief overview. Next, yes, and the next one. All right. So in the 1990s, we see a paradigm shift in immigration policy leading to detention becoming a primary means of immigration enforcement. There should have been a slide before this about the 80s and the war on drugs, where we saw a lot of expansion of immigration detention with certain criminal convictions. Next slide. After the September 11th attacks in 2001, immigration became a national security issue, and this became clear in ICE, Immigration Custom Enforcement's strategic plan called Operation Endgame, which stated its purpose was to, quote, promote the public safety and national security by ensuring the departure from the US of all removable aliens through the fair and effective enforcement of the nation's immigration laws. That's the next slide. In 2009 to 2016, under the Obama administration, we see the implementation of the detention bed quota and the expansion of deportation programs such as 287G, the Secure Communities, and the Criminal Alien Program, which funnels thousands of immigrants into detention centers. In 2014, we saw even more detention expansion when the White House responded to an influx of Central American refugee families with the resurgence of family detention. Next slide. Under the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, we saw a further expansion of these parts of the deportation agenda, increased numbers of 287G agreements, which allows ICE to contract with local law enforcement, local and state law enforcement. We also see ramping up of community raids and elimination of policies that deprioritize detention and deportation for some immigrants under the previous administration. Next slide. So under the Trump administration, the average daily population of detained immigrants increased from approximately 7,000 in 1994, sorry, this is over decades, 7,000 in 1994 to 19,000 in 2001 and to over 50,000 in 2019. Next slide. Due to the Trump administration's expanded use of deportations and asylum bans, coupled with the COVID-19 border closure, in January 2021, the number of people in immigration detention fell to about 15,000 people, which was the lowest since 1999. However, under the Biden administration, the number increased again to more than 20,000 by the end of 2021. Next slide. The Biden administration continued to fund increased numbers of detention beds, encouraged continued expansion of the 287G program, and pursued new and expanded detention facility contracts. So while the number of interior arrests decreased, in large part due to pro-immigrant state legislation, and a handful of facilities closed or ended their contracts with ICE, thanks to years of local organizing, the pipeline to detention expanded overall during Biden's term. Next slide. Biden paved the way for the Trump administration's massive expansion of immigration detention. Next slide. So here we are in the present day. With the return of Trump in 2025, a very cruel mass detention and deportation agenda reached previously unimaginable scope and scale. Trump has proliferated ICE operations into other government agencies such as the Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Defense, using military bases as deportation hubs and growing ICE partnerships with local sheriffs and county jails. The administration has expanded surveillance. They've brought back family detention, incarcerated people in an abusive mega prison in El Salvador, carried out third country deportations, and increased neighborhood and workplace ICE raids that make our communities less safe, kill people in the streets, and disappear people, including activists who oppose Trump's agenda. Next slide. People are being funneled into ICE's network of private prisons, county jails, state and federal prisons, and makeshift detention camps, often sowing fear and confusion with facility transfers. And a new threat looms as the Trump administration is seeking to jail people in large-scale warehouses, a move that is being fought tooth and nail at the local and national level, including today in some widespread protests that I think we'll hear about later. Next slide. Next slide, please. So under Trump, ICE is operating with unprecedented funding, now the largest federal law enforcement agency in the US, and running the largest immigration detention center system in the world. And thank you to Deyadira, who made note that today we have 60,000 people in immigration detention, and just in 2026, 17 deaths of people in immigration detention. That is my last slide. A lot of this information was gleaned from the Detention Watch Network, so I wanted to cite that source. So that is to give you just the broader context. It's the heavy stuff, and I'm wanting to, because Delilah Montoya's exhibition is so full of hope, full of creativity, full of joy, we're not gonna end on the heavy stuff. In fact, we'll touch on some victories and glimmers of hope. So I will pass it to Delilah. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, good. Right then, I just want to honor the Albuquerque Museum, who gave me a retrospective exhibition that, for me, has been a profound experience and has allowed review of my motivations, processes, and explorations. More important, the feedback from our community has been such a positive experience. Clearly, Albuquerque is an open, thoughtful, and uniquely New Mexican place that proves to be very welcoming. What complements this experience was the staff at the Albuquerque Museum. It's amazing professionalism under the direction of then head curator Josie Lopez and the current director Andrew Connors. Great care was given to present a clear depiction of my life's work. I'm just trying to give everybody props here, right? I thank everyone for their energies in producing this exhibition that celebrates activating Chicana resistance. Clearly, this definitely speaks to the integrity of the museum's commitment to Albuquerque by nurturing a remarkable, caring community. And I have to say, from my heart, there's no better place to be than Albuquerque. So thank you. It's been incredible. It really has. And, what an experience. I mean, amazing experience. Thank you all. I'm an artist that has been working with Chicana issues for nearly 40 years. My interest is with my community and our concerns. I was born in Texas on an Air Force base. However, my mother and father grew up in Las Vegas, New Mexico. Yeah, Vegas. Eventually, the family moved to Omaha, Nebraska, but continued their ties to New Mexico. It's where our family was. We always came home. But it was in Omaha that I became politicized as a Chicana. Yes, believe it or not. The brown beret made it to Omaha. At 23, I left Omaha and headed back to New Mexico by way of Denver. I was determined to learn more about art, activism, and Chicanidad. Eventually, in 1980, I bet you there's a few people that weren't even born in 1980 here. Right, well, back in 1980, knowing the photo, I knew that the photo program at UNM was ranked nationally. And I enrolled in the art department at that time. People like Beaumont Newhall and Van Daren Koch were part of the faculty. Also, like Denver, Albuquerque was a center of Chicano activism, where movimiento leaders like Corky Gonzalez and Reyes Lopez Tijerina organized. Clearly, this environment of art and art education and activism drew me to Albuquerque. It was a place where I could grow and mature as a Chicana artist and a photographic printmaker. Ultimately, I received my MFA from UNM, and with that, I began teaching full-time, first at Cal State LA in California, and then Hampshire and Smith College on the East Coast in Western Massachusetts, And later, I was appointed to a tenure-track position at the University of Houston, where I taught for the next 19 years, and was eventually promoted to full professor. I was actually offered a number of jobs, but I decided on Houston. Why? Because it's a 2-hour flight from Albuquerque. That was very important. As part of my scholarship, I produced the work that is in the Albuquerque Museum. Each series represents my activism at a point in time and within geographic location that I found myself in. For example, Sagrado Corazón, Saints and Sinners, and La Guadalupana was produced while interacting with the Albuquerque community in the 80s and 90s. Shooting the Tourist was produced while teaching at Cal State LA, and Detention Nation was influenced by my experience in Houston. As a Chicana artist whose work reflects a commitment to Latinx causes, migration is monumental to the Latinx experience, exploring a way of speaking and learning about the issues surrounding that experience motivated by my commitment to get behind such causes. So really what you're seeing in the retrospective is where I was at different points in time of exploring Chicanidad. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much to the Albuquerque Museum, Delilah and Elizabeth, for your hospitality and welcoming me to Albuquerque. This is my first time here. Thank you. You have a beautiful city. I'm coming here from Houston, Texas, and so the sky here is nothing like that back home. Our skies are pink and purple, and it's not because it's naturally that way. It's because of the petrochemical industry. So, but your skies are so beautiful, and it is just amazing to be able to take a fresh breath of air. I'm eternally grateful to Delilah, to meeting her and bringing me into these spaces. Art is not a stranger to my family. As you see here, my family's up there, including Delilah, including Jessica. This is a full circle moment for me because it was through one of the Detention Nation exhibits that Delilah introduces me to Jessica, and Jessica says, "I know you from somewhere." And I'm going, "Where?" And she said, "I have a picture I want to show you." And she shows me a picture of her she's about 10 years old, she's in elementary school, and I'm sitting next to her, helping her with her homework, and I'm going, "Oh my God, how did you know Delilah?" So it's just a full circle moment to be able to see the people whose lives you've touched come back into these spaces where we're sharing the justice work, we're sharing movements, and it continues to give. It continues to, as educators, and I truly feel that everyone on the stage is an educator, and that's where my heart lies. Exhibits like Detention Nation serve as a tool. It's a political tool so that we may be able to reach more people. We may be able to communicate in different ways that we haven't been able to communicate before. And so right now, I was talking to my fellow panelists and moderator earlier that this is a pivotal moment for us because today we have actions all across the US calling on people just like yourselves who are in attendance today, who are also in attendance at a rally in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and standing up against warehousing immigrants, warehousing people. Because as you've seen in Detention Nation, the Mylar, the way that the Mylar is exhibited, that is no mistake. That is the Mylar that is also being used inside detention centers. That is everything that people need in order to stay warm. And we see this Mylar represented internationally, perhaps silver, perhaps gold, but all the same, by the institutions that use people as commodities, that use people and exchange people. And that's why we are all here today, because this is the injustice that we're facing. The intersection of my work is environmental justice, because as Detention Watch Network and other allies have also said, prisons are also toxic. And prisons are not just toxic to us as a society, they're toxic to the people that inhabit them, they're toxic to our families, and they have second and third degree levels of toxicity into our communities that we are trying to reduce and minimize and stop altogether that toxicity onto future generations. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here and speak with you today. And I will pass it over to T.
I'll just keep my introductory remarks brief. I'm from El Paso, Texas, but was raised also in Santa Teresa and born in 1980. And came up in a time in El Paso when the border was much freer. Before 9/11, before the Patriot Act, it was a much more fluid border. There are 3 ports of entry into El Paso, and then I moved to Santa Teresa before the 4th port of entry opened up at Santa Teresa. And so growing up on the border, I was very informed by a flow of immigration that was not criminalized. I went to school in downtown El Paso, and there were multiple kids that I went to school with who lived in Juarez and would cross over into El Paso every day and go to school. There was a seminal event in 1994 when the peso was devalued, and the peso went from 3 to 1 to the dollar to almost 60 to the dollar, and overnight kids didn't come back to school the next day when we got back from winter break. So I was shocked that kids could disappear from my community, my school community overnight, and my mom, who had us when she was really young, but went back to school when I was very young to go to UTEP to major in art history, found a little thing in the paper that UTEP was going to do a talk on the peso devaluation, and she took me to it. And that was really where I got radicalized by political economy and why people are criminalized, why capital is really what drives this migration, criminalization of migration. These borders are made up, and over the last 45 years, they have become more and more militarized. In fact, one of the most militarized zones in the entire world is at our southern border. We have 3 detention centers in New Mexico. We have a giant one in El Paso on Fort Bliss called Camp East Montana that has the capacity to hold 5,000 beds. So the capacity to detain people here in this region is close to 7,000 people. I'll get later into the detention, the picture of detention in New Mexico, but that's kind of what has always inspired me to be involved in and walk with and advocate and defend immigrant communities. I had a long journey from El Paso, like being a little non-binary queer kid was not cool in the 80s and the 90s down there. It's changed a lot. So I went to San Francisco and got radicalized there as well in college and law school, and then had the opportunity to move to Miami to work with the New Florida Majority and the Miami Workers Center, which taught me a lot more about movement lawyering, and then finally had the opportunity to come back to New Mexico and have tried to braid this artivism, activism, lawyering, community advocacy, community organizing, and there are so many great organizations doing that in New Mexico. If you know anything about the wins that we've seen here over the last 10 years, it's in large part due to the membership-based organizations that have been organizing for decades. So when you hear about free childcare or free university, regardless of immigration status, it's because of these membership-based organizations, and we are so proud at New Mexico Immigrant Law Center to walk with them. And I just want to highlight, there's a lot of events happening this week. Today is the day of action that Deyadira mentioned. There is one in El Paso that NMILC, the ACLU of Texas Border Network for Human Rights, and Las Americas are involved in, to Caravan to Campus Montana. There's the one in Las Cruces. And they're happening all over the country, so you can go online and find out about that. Friday is May Day, and there is a national walkout, Don't Work, Don't Go to School, and organizations here like Organizing in the Land of Enchantment, OLE, Center for Civic Policy, Organizing Power in Numbers, dozens and dozens of labor unions, El Centro de Igualdad y Derechos are all going to be doing May Day events. And so you can check out online about that, because all of this is connected to me. And I think Deyadira was also saying the same thing, that we can't separate these issues, they're intersect, and I think that the exhibition that Delilah put together beautifully captures that intersection in every single room. But please do, if you haven't seen it, visit that final room to just get a tiny little taste of what it's like to be in a detention cell and to visit a detention center. And you can reach out to New Mexico Immigrant Law Center if you'd like to volunteer. We go out to the detention centers, and I see members of our deportation defense team here today. Thank you so much for coming out. And I have our volunteer coordinator back here as well, Delaney, and our communications director, Rachel. So it's an honor to be on this stage with this just incredible artist, with a lifelong activist, and also this incredible moderator. So thank you.
Thank you, Teague. Thank you, all of our panelists. We'll dive into a few questions, and we will have a few minutes for questions from the audience at the end. So I want to just start with the broader theme of art and activism, and maybe we'll start with you, Delilah. What do you see as the power of combining art and activism, and also what are the challenges?
For me, powerful activist work happens when the camera, when the viewer can enter into it. It happens when questions, memories, and imaginations are stimulated. Sometimes it's important not to say it all, but it provides experiences that the viewer can hold and add to. Activist artwork should evoke meaningful conversations. So one of the things that happens in terms of my own work is things that are visible and invisible. I've always was ready to think about the dual nature of things. So think about Saints and Sinners, one of the series that I have there. That's a dual nature. Each space helps define the other's nature. It's a positive-negative relationship. So when we put together Detention Nation as the Sin Huellas collective and Sid the Trail of Thirst, we made use of faceless portraits. First, because anonymity is really essential when working with the undocumented community. So this kind of forced us to think about how do you depict a community while still maintaining their privacy. So what we began to do was utilize kind of processes that kind of evidence presence, but maintained that balance between revealing and not revealing. So there was a balance that needed to be made. And so what we were using was the negative space in order to reveal, if that makes sense. It's like, it's what outlines everything. Detention Nation 2015 is an immersive experience produced by the Sin Huellas collective. And so I didn't do this by myself. I couldn't do it by myself. I needed everybody that was part of the collective to contribute. What we did was confront the viewer with detainees' experience, and one of the things that I used was cyanotype silhouettes to represent the human presence. And the human presence also gets foreground in Sid the Trail of Thirst, which was done in 2004. And what we were doing was looking at the migrant trails of the crossing of the southern border. And it was at that time that a lot of the crossing was happening further and further away from the ports. But what that meant, it was in more dangerous areas and more dangerous zones that they were going into, which was, there was a lot more deaths that were happening along that area, particularly within Arizona, and we were looking at the Tucson sector. And we were what we wanted to do was reveal the humanitarian crisis that was happening on the US-Mexican border at that time. So what I wanted to do was use the panoramic landscapes to begin to evidence the passing. In other words, the passing of the immigrants through those landscapes. And what you begin to see is just the things that were dropped, things that were left behind. The other thing that, I'm not a documentary photographer. I really don't do documentary, and one would think that activist work would be all about documentary, but for me, no. What I wanted to do was use the camera or my art in order to send a message, to begin to talk about the conditions. And so one of the things that we began to focus on was the human interactions with the landmarks and locales. And what we found that it really provided this focus of the absence of the human figure. And once I had the absence of the human figure in the landscape, it began to convey the idea of the invisible, or the attempt to be invisible, and the silenced community. And within that silence, it also means survival. So, migrant campsite, you will see like a pink backpack and a single black leather boot to remind us that women and children are also passing through. So, but also there's this use of the shadow that I was using. By using a human shadow, I was calling up the migrants present. The shadow in the foreground is a silhouette without the figure that casts it, suggests, in other words, no person's there. It's just like, and I was kind of thinking about Peter Pan, right? Peter Pan and how the shadow was left behind. And so what I was trying to do was to leave that shadow behind. And so what it suggests is that the land is carrying the stories of those who passed. I was looking for the memory of the land itself. The role of the panoramic landscape was to observe the memory held by the land. The land holds the scars, dreams, terrors, and success of every crossing. Amalia Mesa Baines wrote that the land holds the memory of our presence and passing. And with this work, I was trying to think through that statement. My desire was to make those tragic landscapes epic, like the Western paintings and photographs that represent America. The migrant trails are an American experience, just like those the pioneers traversed seeking new lives. Thank you.
Thank you. So Deyadira or Teague, would you like to talk about art and activism, or the role of storytelling in your work?
Yeah, we've had this conversation for quite many years on art and activism. For me, as I'm thinking through those many conversations, what comes up is that in conjunction, art and activism both allow us to grow support. At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reach as many people as we can to get involved, to understand what is happening. And together we convey this information and we strengthen this communication. In my experience, art has blossomed at unexpected times. And and in spaces spontaneously, the same way that organizing shows up. All of a sudden, you will see a protest happening across the street, or you will see art happen just spontaneously. That's the beauty of it, but it's not happening out of a sense of romanticism. It's happening because of need, because it has to happen. And there have been moments where we are organizing, and those moments are very difficult. And all of a sudden, someone will show up with a sign. A teacher will show up with a sign that they made with their students in the classroom. And just that is like, it's a moment that we've brought a new person into this movement that is going to show support. Because we know that this work is exhausting. We know that it has to be sustainable. How do we make it sustainable? And that is the contribution of art and activism. They work together. They also both possess the ability to interrupt. Art and activism possess that ability to be able to interrupt injustice. That's what I take away.
I was so moved by the panoramic spaces. Up until the Trump administration came in for 2.0, there's an area in El Paso that, it's very interesting in El Paso, like Ciudad Juarez, El Paso, and Santa Teresa all intersect, and you can be crossing over into Texas, into New Mexico, just across the street, across a block. And there used to be a copper smelting plant called Asarco, and members of my family were part of the group that built the Mount Cristo Rey, which is like the cross that you see above El Paso. And the border wall now comes right up to that mountain. But until it did, you could find what folks had left behind as they were crossing there, right there beneath that cross. So I was very, very moved when I saw those pictures in your exhibition. For our work, we have a communications team, and we have a very talented and gifted videographer, Felipe Vasquez, who puts together just gorgeous storytelling, because we're convinced that that is one of the only ways that we can change people's hearts and minds, by centering narrative, centering story. At the Day of Action, at the opening of the legislative session here in New Mexico in January, our team co-executive produced a film. Jessica Martinez, our policy director, and Lena Sanchez-Weber from the ACLU of New Mexico premiered a film that tried to make real the impact of detention on a child's life. And we shared that before we marched and went into the Roundhouse to do our advocacy, so that we could put the stories of what's actually happening at the very center of our hearts and minds before we went in to meet with the legislators to advocate for our agenda this year, which I'll talk later about. I think that we've become convinced that when you put immigrants at the center of your political agenda, you win, and you win big. And New Mexico proves that. And so what we want to be engaged in with all of our partners is supporting that centering of immigrants at the heart of an economic agenda, at the heart of a political agenda, and to not, in these times in particular, retreat from that. And so we do that by making art. And so we've partnered with entities and institutions across the Southwest in photo exhibitions in Arizona, in the storytelling and the filmmaking that Felipe does, and the amazing photography that Rachel does. And I think that it has to be and should be a part of our legal and advocacy strategy.
Thank you. Maybe, yes, art and storytelling is at the center. Maybe you can talk about transition into some of the things that are happening present day in New Mexico, and what's giving you hope.
Sure. So I mentioned before that New Mexico has currently three immigrant detention centers. We had a very successful legislative session. For 10 years, advocates have been trying to pass a version of what's called HB 9, or the Immigrant Safety Act. It started, we are part of groups and part of an abolitionist agenda. So 10 years ago, it was very much ending private prison agenda. It was called People Over Private Prisons, or POP. then several years ago, we transitioned to making it a more targeted legislative agenda to try and at least get New Mexico out of the business of profiting on these detention centers by ending this contractual, super technical term called the Intergovernmental Service Agreement. So the bill had gotten really close the last prior legislative sessions, but in this past one actually did pass, and we call it HB 9+, because in concert with our other legislative partners at Somos El Centro and Semilla Project, as well as Contigo, we added a prohibition to what was up on the screen before. 287G agreements allow ICE to deputize local law enforcement to act as ICE agents. And this is required in Texas. It's a state law that all counties have that. But now in New Mexico, as of this month, they're prohibited in every county. Unfortunately, because it took 60 days for the bill to become effective, there's more money flowing through ICE than ever before. There is more money to be made from detention and incarcerating our brothers and sisters than ever before. And so within 60 days, ICE and these private detention companies, in particular CoreCivic and MTC, figured out how to get around are trying to figure out how to get around the legislation. So Cibola holds about 235 immigrants right now. Otero County holds about 900 folks. That's in the southern part of the state. And Torrance holds 352 of our brothers and sisters. So because the bill was more incremental, it does not, and it cannot, because of Federal Supremacy Clause, ban ICE detention in New Mexico. ICE can still contract directly with these private companies because they own the detention centers and they own the land to operate in New Mexico, in Torrance and Cibola. So they are seeking to sole source with those private companies. It is still a win because it means that New Mexican counties are no longer benefiting or profiting from the revenue for entering into those contractual agreements. But it also means that we're going to have to litigate, most likely in Otero County, because that is county-owned land, and Otero County is making the argument that they should be allowed to enter into contract directly with ICE. So we'll see where that's going. There is the potential for another center to open in Lee County, which is where Hobbs is. That's in southeast New Mexico. There was a land swap done with a private individual with another private prison company called Geo Group right before the law passed. And so we're exploring what the options are there. All of this work has been done in coalition with ACLU New Mexico, Dream Team, both the chapter up here and down south, Innovation Law Lab, Las Americas was a supporter for a long time, and finally our steering committee, and just the light of our organization and the philosophy that really guides the work is the abolitionist work of Detention Watch Network. And so and then there were 25 other organizations that I can't name all who were a part of the coalition to pass that successful bill. So what gives me hope is that work in community when young people show up in busfuls to advocate for their family, for their loved ones, when people who have never been a part of political organizing are activated, whether it's an Indivisible or any other group or formation that they're a part of, when communities who have never organized are figuring out how to sign up for community defender trainings, I think that's really what gives me a lot of hope. And for the last year and a half, I've been carrying with me, I have it in my purse right now, a book by Roshi Norma Wong. She's an indigenous native Hawaiian, also has Japanese ancestry, and she talks about periods of collective acceleration. Typically, we think of time operating in a linear, straight line, but there are times like this when we seem to be sliding into a period of consolidation of authoritarianism, where the line shrinks. It almost shrinks like an accordion. And the right is using that to powerful effect, but we can use that too. And what we have to do right now is organize and think about what's possible on the other side of this collective acceleration moment, because it was broken, it was busted 2 years ago. We don't want to go back to what that was, but what are we doing in terms of envisioning and building the future that we want, and we're doing that in community. I see Matthew Henderson here from Organizing Land in the Enchantment, who's been doing it for decades. So I think that when I start to feel some despair, I rely on the good work that I know so many of us in this room are doing, and also for the first time, people coming out to organize. So let's not just block and defend, let's build and vision the future that we want.
Thank you for that. Maybe right now we can open it up for any audience questions. And I think we've got a mic. We've got a mic going around that Elizabeth is going to
Testing. Okay.
pass around. We'll go there and then up front.
Hi. As you were talking about the power of art, particularly in this horrible situation that we're in with people being snatched and children, and the story that occurred to me and the question I wanted to ask was, there was a story in ProPublica where they had gotten a hold of artwork from children, I think at the Dilley Detention Center, and they published this, which created a tremendous public response, and the response from the center was, of course, to crack down on, to take all art supplies away, to hover over people when they're making calls, to deny them access to Gmail. But I wonder if you could, it made me think about particularly the impact not only of those of us who are outside trying to help, but those who are caught up in the system, and how the impact of that art affects us when we find out about it.
Well, I think that the Detention Nation exhibition is such a powerful, direct example of what you're talking about. And because part of the exhibition is about writing letters to people in detention and reading letters in response. Deyadira, do you want to say anything to that?
I'll be brief because I know there are good comments here too. So in the process of creating this exhibit, there was a hunger strike that was happening. And there was a demand letter that was written by people that were detained. And what struck us was the very first demand was to eliminate family detentions, children in detention. And we were like, we were blown because we were like, they are not even thinking of themselves. And this is coming from a male detention center. They were thinking about others. They were thinking about families. So it's moments like that that when we were speaking to the men, asking, wait a minute, but they're telling us that they have, they give you some kind of recreation time. What does that look like? They said, there's no recreation time. They gave us popsicle sticks. That's what they call recreation. And it's the same thing in some of the centers that house families, that house children. But through these conversations, we've also spoken to people who have signed up to be volunteers, who have gone into the detention centers, either short-term, long-term, or family. And the question on, should I even be doing this? Should I even be collaborating because I'm part of the problem? Goes back to, what is it that you're able to do within that system? Are you able to provide some kind of healing? Are you able to provide some kind of connection in a place where therapists or guards or whoever are already told, do not show empathy? So what is it that you're able to do even within that role? And I know it's controversial because some people will say, my values mean no altogether, I'm not gonna uphold it, whereas you will have other people that say, I'm gonna help in any way that I can. And I'm no one to tell you what you're gonna do with that. I'm just here to convey that's the reality. Oh, sorry.
Do you want to add anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay, we had another question here.
Thank you. My name is Kelly McCloskey, and I coordinate a group called VIDA, Volunteers for Immigrants in Detention Albuquerque. I'm here with some of my volunteers, as well as Teague mentioned, members of the deportation defense team. So I get to spend a lot of time in detention centers, and what I want to say to Deyadira and to Delilah is thank you for lifting the voices of people that Pat and I just spent the morning with with 30 men at Torrance County Detention Facility. And when you ask about what gives hope, which I thought was such a beautiful question, to me what gives me hope are, well, what you've done to lift up the humanity of people that are experiencing great injustice. And I'm sympathetic to your question, but what gives me hope is the way that those men, they are men at Torrance, are facing really cruel and torturous treatment and great injustice with so much humanity. And our organization is about making connections, which I think is what you were talking about. And to me, that human connection is always worth it. And you said you're not one to tell people what to do, but I will tell you that you should be a VITA volunteer, and you should write to someone in detention. Because if you can't come with us to see in person the humanity, you can write to someone and you can make a difference, and you can remind people that they're not forgotten. And to me, that's an honor. So I just wanted to say thank you, because I just think the exhibit is very meaningful and very beautiful, and clearly the retrospective gives us a picture of all the things that you've done, which to me was amazing that I got to experience with my daughter and see it, and I just thought it was so beautiful, because I was, as a VITA person, really focused on the Detention Nation. But thank you for taking your skill and your talent and for putting it to something that's so meaningful, which is injustice and basically fighting back, but also lifting up the hope and the beauty that we see every time that we go to a detention center. Thank you.
Well, you know, it's people like you that give me inspiration. You know, it's like, it's a community. We have to work with each other and use what we do well, because that's going to be what's going to work the best, right? And so, no, thank you for really engaging in on the work. I really appreciate it, but our work isn't done yet, right? We still have a ways to go. Abolition, yes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Okay, so I have a question that's general for, activists or non-activists in the room, and for all the members of the panel, that I think that we can all kind of relate to. Can you give us some words of advice when we have to handle conflict within our groups, so that we can continue to struggle together?
That's a great question. Handling conflict within the groups, that was your question, right? Yes. Anyone want to take that one?
Well, working with the Sin Huellas collective and working with, other groups and such, I think, for me, I think the way I handle conflict is to step back and listen. And try to listen as clearly as you can, because many times there is a point of convergence, right? There is a point that one can hold on to. Sometimes you can actually learn through the conflict and allow that to be a learning experience. Sometimes you have to just let go and allow it to move in the direction that it's moving, because that might be the place it needs to be. Right, so nothing ever goes in a direct line. There's always these veins that come in and out and move around. But the important thing is to work together on the level that you can work together.
I have been in a lot of different states and a lot of different cities, supporting and working with a lot of different movements, and conflict happens in all of those spaces. It's natural. I think what is needed are people who are skilled in facilitating and mediating conflict and addressing conflict, and we've had to do that in our own coalition. And I think sometimes if you can't have that skilled mediation within, then seeking a community member who has done it and is skilled at doing it is really important. I always start with a needs assessment and one-on-ones, and finding out whether or not what the person needs can actually be met in the coalition or activist space. If you can start there and identify what can actually be met or not be met, and then have the group come together and with those needs that can actually be met in a coalition, come up with some working agreements, and then attend to those and make those what you start with and end with every time you meet can be a beginning. But a lot of times in activist spaces, I think it's normal for people to get really passionate and to have different opinions and points of view about the direction. But the people who should be leading those spaces are the people who are actually experiencing what the activism is around. So if you don't have immigrant members in your coalition, then go talk to an immigrant rights coalition and ask them what the issues should be that group should be focusing on. Because if you're in solidarity or an allyship with, the people who are at the tip of the spear should be leading your activism.
Thank you for that. I love to hear from both of you about that, because I think when you're trained as an artist, you're often trained to be an individual. And I think sometimes, I mean, just generally in our society too, like our ideas about activism or art making are centered around individuals. So how can we practice that skill of collaboration and conflict and negotiation with each other? One more question, perhaps, from the audience? Yes.
I wanted to ask about the indigenous people on the border, because they actually had lands that didn't recognize on the border. And is there any way that assists in helping argue this for larger groups of people crossing a border and it also affects the issue of art, because they have beautiful baskets and other kinds of things that are internationally known. So I was wondering if there's any instruction that you get from the connection with indigenous people.
Actually, Suhan, do you mind just
I'll repeat
summarizing?
the question. Yes, the question
Thanks.
was about indigenous tribes that are cut by the border wall, and what kind of leadership or directions we can take from them.
So I'm curious, are you thinking about the Arizona? Taham, okay. Yeah, that was one of the things that we were really aware of when Orlando Lara and I went down to the Tucson sector. Intellectually, because Orlando is very much an intellectual, he told me about this space that kind of served as a metaphor for Latinos, Chicanos, because it was the border that was crossing the tribe. And the border crosses our tribe, the Chicano-Latino tribe. That border crosses our tribe as well. And so one of the things that we found when we went down there was that the tribe itself was conflicted. Some people in the tribe felt that they needed to stop the border crossings that were happening there. Other members of the tribe saw it as a humanitarian crisis. But what they both had in common was that they didn't want the migra there. They didn't want to be patrolled by immigration. So what the conflict kind of stirred conversation within the tribe itself. But there was Mike Wilson, who was a humanitarian. He was the one that was putting out the water for the immigrants, right? He was the one doing that. Other tribe members were trying to discourage him from doing that because they didn't want people passing through basically their backyards, right? So I guess my answer to you is that we have to allow the tribes to make their own decisions how they wanted to handle that. And at this point, Mike Wilson became, a leader of the tribe and kind of pulled their conscience. But has it been resolved? I don't know. I don't think so.
A member of our coalition is Native Vote and NAVA, led by Atza Chavez, and she spoke at the legislative session and talked about how the border crossed crossed the tribes too. It didn't it crossed Chicanos, and it crossed the folks who'd been living here for generations. I think interrogating that is really important, and I think that we've made strong allyship with groups who are comprised of Native folks and tribal members, because I hear the argument that you're making, and it's, to me, seems really obvious that that's the case. Not to hype another museum, but in Santa Fe, there's a new exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Native Art that just opened called Paper Trails. It's just incredible and talks about, interrogates really through paper, the history of the breaking of treaties throughout the North American and Pacific, Asian Pacific Islands. I think that that's a natural allyship, but again, I would not profess to speak for that community. It's just what I've seen in Coalition and what I saw in that exhibition. Highly recommend that exhibition.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we will wrap here. Thank you so much to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause.